Give me your thoughts on that, by the way. Like, and pair it with your thoughts on Trump in general. I mean, it's been what, 2 months? It feels like 3 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the thing is that I always this was my kind of vision for how this ended. Is that, I mean, Trump is big on pomp and ceremony, and I think that he would chalk it up as a major win if he was to meet with Putin and Zelensky and hold up some signed peace deal. I mean, or whoever replaces Zelensky. His position seems to be rather shaky. I mean, there's another point to make here as well, which is that the focus of the administration, number one, is the for a very long time, and this has not been really discussed with any serious in the media, with any degree of seriousness in the media, of course, is that the US is running dangerously low of ammunition and shells and vehicles and other equipment to send to Ukraine. And then when you factor in the enormous appetite of Netanyahu and his satanic sect in Tel Aviv, like all of their voracious hunger for
they give Satan a bad name. I'm sorry to interrupt. They give Satan a bad name. They give Satan a bad name. You're saying a very bad name.
I like that. Yeah, and it's funny because it's true. But the point is that basically that for a very long time it has been acknowledged in like kind of Pentagon reports and the kind of more serious sectors of the think tank gravy train, that the US can't sustain its own ammunition needs, let alone just keep sending endless wave after wave of weapon shipments to Ukraine. Like, it is dipping into its own kind of emergency stockpiles to do this. European countries have sent their entire fleets of F-16 fighters. They've sent all of their shells to Ukraine without any ability to replace what's been sent on at any pace or scale. And so I think that, that aside from peace for peace's sake, there is a very pressing need to wrap up Ukraine very, very quickly. And also, if the ultimate end goal here was to, from the US perspective, with Maidan, etc., was to create, another satellite or puppet state in Eastern Europe, where you have everything run by Western corporations, and you have the local population working for subsistence wages for Western corporations and their resources, of which Ukraine is particularly rich, are effectively just up for rape and pillage at bargain rates for the US and its European allies. In that context, like, you need enough people left alive. And I think that the Western news outlets have reported that there are entire regions of Ukraine which don't have a male population anymore, because everyone's either dead or they've fled the country or are in hiding from conscription. So that's another, reason to end this. And I might add that, I mean, there are two very clear historical precedents here, which I think that people often forget, because, I mean, for all of the tub thumping rhetoric and all of the commitments to, preserving Ukraine's democracy against tyranny and blah, 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 blah. I mean, we heard similar things about Afghanistan for 20 years, and then the US just did a runner. And then Afghanistan dropped off everyone's radar. It's not really spoken of at all anymore. Like 20 years in which, billions, if not trillions, were pumped into creating this puppet government, and all that implies, with a CIA-trained intelligence agency, a US-trained and equipped military, which collapsed in less than a day. What must also be remembered was that the terms of that US retreat were not brokered with the puppet government in Kabul, but with the Taliban directly. Trump spoke to Taliban leaders about how US withdrawal would work, because there was no need to include the Afghan government in those discussions, because they had no legitimacy or credibility or even power outside Kabul itself. Now, there is a fascinating report by the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction on the collapse of Kabul, which notes that several State Department officials were interviewed for this report, and they stated that they had several conversations with Ghani, who was the US puppet in Afghanistan, where they explicitly told him, "We are leaving and we're not coming back," and he didn't believe them, because of all of the public rhetorical commitments to Afghanistan's future that had been made by US leaders, but also because all of the blood and treasure that had been expended by Washington over 20 years in Afghanistan. He thought it wouldn't happen. Now, we have to speculate whether the same conversations are being had with Ukrainian officials, and they are likewise disbelieving. That they think that this is some way of manipulating or coercing them into negotiations, and it's just like, well, I think it's entirely plausible that the US could just pull the rug out from under this. And I might add that that as a warning shot to Zelensky to accept this minerals deal, Trump pulled financial and crucially intelligence aid for Kiev for, I think it was even less than a week. And like that had a devastating impact. And I mean, just to close out this point as well, is what another very interesting phenomenon, which has been largely flying under people's radars, is that like for all European rhetoric about keeping the Ukraine war going, it led to initially the share prices of European defense contractors surging, but then they collapsed again when the heads of these contractors said, well, we don't have the ability to fulfill orders in any kind of rapid time frame. This is going to take years for us to be able to meet Ukraine's equipment needs. The same thing happened in Asia, where suddenly European leaders struck upon the bright idea of buying from countries like South Korea and Japan. Again, very brief share price explosion among Asian defense contractors, and then which then just evaporated when the heads of these companies said, yeah, well, we don't have the capacity to do this. Mm-hmm. So again, for all of their for all of the rhetoric that's emanating from Brussels and Paris and London, they don't have the ability to act independently or autonomously in the field of defense, quote unquote. They remain dependent on the US. So, the piper calls the tune. If the US says to them, this is over and we are absolutely not going to be bounced into keeping it going, then suddenly, people are going to fall into line.
Kit, you're so right. Because, Trump is like, I'll walk. You can do it on your own. He kept saying it. He said it more than once. And I do get the sense that you're right. Okay, you guys said we're with you for as long as it takes. Trump is bluffing. There's no way he'll walk. I think he would walk. I think if Trump, he wants the deal, but he can leave. It's not like he can say, this is Joe Biden's war. It's not my war. It's not on me. It's on Joe Biden. I did everything I could to get a deal. He wants one, but he could leave it. And so it's like, yeah, it's a threat. And he's serious. And so if Ukraine, it's doubtful, as you pointed out, look back at Afghanistan. He was willing to do the same thing. We'll walk. We'll leave. This is not my war. I didn't start this war. I'll leave this war. And I have all of my people put out that it's Joe Biden's fault. And we'll fight it politically on that as you continue to lose and as you continue to effectively fall apart on the battlefield. No, I agree with you. Everything you just said, I agree with you. I want to go to this other story that you wrote. So this is in Global Delinquents.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the MI6 connection with Starmer Bandera.
Yes.
Britain, I swear, man, has had their hands in everything. It's amazing to me. But again, Britain was masters of the world at one point. After the First World War, I think Britain had like 51% of the territory around the globe, an astonishing number, even though they were a brittle empire at that point. And so I guess it's not shocking, but Jesus, this is Starmer Bandera's sinister MI6 alliance exposed. I'm going to let you recount this. You are going into how Britain had connection with Stefan Bandera because, again, they were anti-Soviet. Britain was looking for anything anti-Soviet in order to basically push back against the Soviet Union. Just so happened Nazis tend to be anti-Soviet. So wedding is made. Go into the story for me and explain it to the audience in a way that will make sense to them.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think that the Second World War is quite an interesting thing because Britain was very keen before it started, and one of the reasons that they actually were making deals with Hitler and were rather fond of him being in power in Germany is because he was rabidly anti-communist, and they thought that he would stop the spread of communism and socialism throughout Europe, which was, which it was a successful project for a few years until Britain ended up at war with Germany, and then they were forced to ally with the Soviets, who did all of the fighting, by and large, for the British and the Americans, and crushed the Nazis. Now, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, of course, suddenly the Soviet Union becomes Britain and America's enemy number one. And they were looking for ways in which to undermine, if not implode, the Soviet Union. MI6 struck upon the bright idea of employing Stepan Bandera, who still had fled Ukraine after after World War II, but maintained significant influence locally and was ferrying kind of chaos agents into the country. This kind of dark alliance was forged in the late 1940s, and it continued for the best part of a decade. And the British were determined to maintain this alliance with Bandera, despite the fact that the CIA of all people were opposed to the British doing this, because they felt that he was he was too dangerous and too murderous even for the CIA to go near. Wow. And I think, I in the piece that you've got on the screen, I went through, and there's an enormous number of CIA files related to what's known as Operation Aerodynamic online. No one has taken the time, quite understandably, because there's so much material, has really taken the time to go over them in intensive detail, let alone kind of structure them so they can be searched and easily accessed by the general public. But I unearthed some absolutely extraordinary stuff, like a memo from an MI6 officer who wrote this kind of glowing appraisal of Stepan Bandera, saying that he's convincing and sincere, and praising his terrorist background and ruthless notions of power and how to achieve it, almost like as if he was this kind of charming kind of bandit style figure, this kind of like Robin Hood, when actually he's this like genocidal mass murderer, and who was whose legacy endures in Ukraine to this day. Now, I might add, that's only certain quarters of Ukraine, particularly the west of the country, which is actually historically not Ukrainian territory for the most part. It was given to what was the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic from territory seized from Romania and Poland and Hungary after World War II, and it created the kind of the mongrel state of Ukraine, where you have all of these people with different backgrounds, who have different allegiances culturally or historically to different countries, and are wedged into this single entity called Ukraine, which you have, yes, Hungarians, Romanians, Russians, and then people who out and out identify as Ukrainian, and that's been a problem ever since Ukrainians' 1991 independence, and we're seeing the legacy of that today. But eventually MI6 tired of Bandera, and they were sick of how he was not only targeting Soviet authorities, but he was also kind of in this bitter conflict with other elements of the Ukrainian nationalist or ultra-nationalist movement and undermining them. So they decided to cut all ties with him, because the ultimate end goal of the CIA and MI6 in Ukraine was to foment an ultra-nationalist proxy army that could be used to wage war against the Soviet Union with British and American help, and then therefore collapse the Soviet Union. I have an investigation coming on other declassified CIA records, which document in extraordinary detail plans for invasion and yes, the use of Ukrainians as proxies. And there is this rather stunning map of Ukraine, which splits the country into different kind of ranked areas where Western backing / sympathy for the Soviet Union is high, and it kind of syncs up pretty exactly with where the war is currently happening and where it kind of arguably started, in Crimea, where the report notes, well, we have no chance of fomenting an anti-Russian, anti-communist uprising in Crimea because it's comprised of people who identify as Russian, for instance. So this was a kind of dark alliance, which I think has enormous relevance to today.